So this morning we're going to talk about conversion optimization. We'll cover a bit of its history, some tactics that it includes, some key value propositions of conversion optimization, and then really, if you guys are like, this is great, how would I get started using conversion optimization within my own organization, how you could go about doing that too. So, we know a lot of companies spend a lot of time and money and resources doing marketing and on their website. And there is always one question in everyone's mind who's involved in that, and as it should be, how do we maximize our efforts? And that question was really what led us at Adept to building out our service offering of conversion optimization, because it addresses that question. So that is ultimately one thing that touches every element of marketing and the website is conversion considerations and analytics. So that's why we put a lot of weight on it, and I think as we work through this, you guys will understand really the value of it too.
So I'm going to start today with a little story, and the purpose is to give some context around where conversion optimization has started, why it's important, and kind of where it is today. So does everyone remember this guy? Seems like ages ago. But this was Brock in the middle of his 2008 primary, and he decided to give a presentation at the Google offices. I believe it was in California. And there was a guy in the audience, his name was Dan Soroker, and he was really inspired by the talk. And he said, I'm going to leave my product manager job here at Google, I'm going to join the campaign and join the fight. And so he did, and while he was on the campaign, he became the director of analytics. And one of their goals was to improve the website performance of the campaign site. And so they sat and they had some ideas around what they want to do, changes they want to make, but ultimately they decided that they wanted to take more of a scientific approach around how they actually improve the site. And so to do that, other companies and organizations were doing similar things, but essentially they used the campaign site as the control, and they measured that against 6 to 7 different variations. And the purpose was to see which variation was performing the best. And by performing the best, that meant email signups and donations. And so they had a couple different variations. One was Brock sort of surrounded by his supporters. They had a version of sort of him up front, a little bit more visual there of his profile. One of him surrounded by his family, and then another version of him giving a emotional, powerful sort of presentation. And so they had some assumptions internally around which version they thought was going to win. A lot were voting on the video. They thought that was going to really drive emotional response. But ultimately, they ended up running this test. And after a certain period of time, they looked at the results. And they were actually surprised that it was the version of him surrounded by his family that had outperformed the other versions. And so once they ran this test variation live and did all the math, they were actually able to show that they were able to generate $60 million in additional donation funds and increase email signups by 40%. So had they not done that testing, had they assumed that the best version was, say, the video, they would not have generated these results. And Dan ended up taking that knowledge with him and started his own company called Optimizely. And Optimizely is a tool that we're certified on, we have certified designers and developers. It allows other companies and organizations to perform similar types of testing on their sites. And ultimately, that's a part of conversion optimization. It's not the only part, but if we could start today with a little definition. I think Tim Ash said it best. He said it's the art and science of getting people to act once they're on their website. And really 3 parts to this definition. One, it's an art. It does take creative thinking, creative thought. There is some risk-taking involved. But it's also a science. It's an approach that involves taking quantitative, qualitative data, using that to create a hypothesis, testing that hypothesis, evaluating the results, and then doing that again and again. And then the last part, it's really all about getting people to act. So that could be a micro conversion or a macro conversion. So a micro conversion might be getting someone to add something to a cart, click a button, view a page, and ultimately that drives your macro conversions, which is revenue, sales, and leads. And so we talked a little bit about the why. To dive into that a little bit further, I'm going to break that out a little bit more. So it's obviously a data-driven approach, right? So we want to have data to inform the tests that we run, the designs that we make. So a typical situation might be you've got a CEO and a marketing director sitting in a room, they have some disagreements around a particular design that they want to release. Obviously, both opinions are valid, and you want to take those into consideration. But with CO, we want to have some quantitative and qualitative data at the table with these discussions. And then we want to test those assumptions that we have in terms of which version of a design we think is going to be best. So really, that's kind of one of the core fundamentals of CO, is having a data-driven approach. Second, it's all about uncovering user insights. So we'll talk a little bit more about the research that we do, but really it's about understanding our customer preferences, what they like and dislike about a web experience, what they prefer, what motivates them. So again, another fundamental thing is understanding our customers and prospects. A much less understood thing about CO, it can impact value propositions and other goals. So we have one client, we're sort of testing some different value propositions that they have. So they have like 4 to 5 different things that they feel positions them in the market. And so we're presenting those prominently on the site in these different variations. And we're seeing how visitors react differently to them. So if they're engaging more with one value proposition, we may make the assumption that obviously that's more important, and that can drive other things we do on the site. So in addition to that, that can impact your operations, that can impact your business strategy. So a lot of things outside of just website performance that CO can have an implication on. Next, it's about improving site performance. So outside of just conversions and conversion rate, we're looking at CO can improve reducing bounce rate, just overall engagement on a site, ultimately some other metrics besides just conversions. And then last, it's about mitigating risk and having a scaled approach. So one of our clients, large e-commerce company, they do about 2 to 3 million visitors every couple days. And as opposed to sort of launching a design change across either the entire site or even half the site, we actually tested 10% of the traffic. And the purpose there is to mitigate any issues with, if we have bad performance on a particular design change, we want to mitigate that risk as opposed to releasing that to the entire site live. So really it's an important thing about CO is mitigating risk and having more of a scaled approach to web design. So all sounds great, right? So why isn't everyone doing it? Well, there's obviously some misconceptions around it, around conversion optimization. One is that it's too expensive. I would argue that it's too costly not to do it. We invest a lot of time and resources, as Gail alluded to, around generating traffic and getting visitors to our site, but much less so on actually how do we turn that traffic, those visitors, into leads, into sales. So Sarah will talk a little bit more about the ROI of CO, but really it's really an investment that's worth taking. Others think that it's the same thing, split testing. So the Obama campaign was a good example of A/B testing. Probably one of the more important techniques or tactics of CO, but it's certainly not the only one. We'll talk about all the research and research methods that we use and some other tactics in a little bit, but really, again, that's only one technique used. Others feel that it's only for enterprise companies. Certainly very valuable there, but really it's for companies of all sizes. And really, it's the approach that you take in scaling it out based on a company's size. So it's applicable to smaller companies. So in that case, we may do user testing, but we may do it to a smaller sample size. If we're doing A/B testing, typically we'll do a bolder redesign, because obviously if you're testing smaller web design elements, you're not going to get as much of an answer or return on your understanding of what happened. So really applicable to any size company, any industry, or vertical. As far as a process that we take, typical kind of web design project management process. We'll dive into the research here in a little bit, but really it starts with first understanding your customers, understanding your users' behavior. Typically in an engagement, we would start doing some research up front. Could take a couple weeks, could take a month, depending on the size of the company. But we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Next, using that research to develop a plan. So we'll develop a roadmap for the year based on the research. Here's the testing that we would expect to do on the site over the course of the year. It's a very fluid document. It typically changes quite a bit based on the discoveries that we have. And then obviously the design stage is where we're designing and developing these tests as we go forward. Actually implementing those tests, so If we're doing some A/B testing, we'll obviously have to implement some kind of testing technology on the site. Usually just as simple as adding a snippet to a website, and then obviously implementing the tests as we go forward. And then continuing to optimize, so continuing that sort of approach that we talked about where we have a hypothesis, we test that hypothesis, and then repeat the process. So some of the research methods that we use, we're going to kind of dive into each of these here. First is user testing. So sort of old school way of user testing, and certainly applicable still, is more using a physical environment where you're actually bringing customers or users into a physical environment. You're actually observing them doing certain tasks on a website, and then obviously making assumptions based on that. We typically do it remotely, so we use a platform that allows us to invite either customers or prospects that our clients provide us, or we can actually target certain demographics. So we could target by age, by income level, and then we can screen those based on a number of different factors that make sense. And then we'll invite them, essentially provide a link. They'll go into this test and we'll ask them questions as they go forward. So I'll play a quick sort of example of that here. I don't know if I'll have sound or not, but it'll be loud enough. Well, it doesn't like me hitting play there. So in that particular example, there was a gentleman that we asked to do a search on the site, and he looked for, was looking for a certain wood type, and he typed in that search, and the results that he got were a little bit more across the board. So just an example of an insight that you can get from doing user testing. Next is session replays. So this is actually recording a visitor on a site and observing their behavior. Don't know if I'll get to play this one either. But in this case, there was a user who was so this is a franchise site, so they have a number of different franchises across the country. This is their corporate site. So there was a user who was trying to find their state, or their franchise in their state, and they put AZ in the search box there, and the result that they got was the corporate site back. So there was a little error at the top that said, you need to put in your actually full state and city, and it wasn't quite obvious to the user. So there's an example of where maybe the message that came up wasn't displayed in a way that the user could understand that they needed to type in a different query. So, and with this you can see if they're having issues on a site, if they're clicking on things that aren't working correctly. If they're having navigation problems, just a number of different things you can get by just observing a user's behavior on a site. And so we can actually record as many as we want on a page. We can say we only want to see users who are on a page for 30 seconds or more. We can kind of control the type of recordings that we get to obviously create some more efficiency around observing their behavior. Now it's like locked up.
Just thinking about it.
A couple other, with user testing, a couple other things that we've found to be really helpful is that it's not necessarily, doesn't have to be explicit to your site. So you could have users actually go through your site and then go through a competitor's site and have them talk aloud about comparing them and what do they like more and why is that, and rate them. And so that's been really helpful too. And then another thing that's really helpful through user testing that we've found, we're getting creative with user testing, is actually having them go to Google and perform searches, right? So you're interested in buying X. How would you go about researching that? What would your process be? Having them talk through whether or not they would engage people socially. Like, what would your entire decision-making process be for that? So that's been something else that's been really helpful too, is just trying to get additional information outside of just watching the users use the website. So understanding the whole psychology of the buyer process.
Yep. And then next is competitive assessment. So this is where we're obviously looking at other competitors' sites, and making some judgments on whether or not maybe they have a better experience that we want to try to either make our client site experience even better, or if there's other opportunities from what we observe in competitors that we can sort of adopt and test, doing similar tests of what they're doing. And the next is analytics, of course, a very important quantitative tool that we would use in the research process. This particular report, I believe it's for Jenny's actually, where we're looking at their top landing pages, and we're looking at how certain pages bounce rates compared to the average bounce rate, and then making some determinations on that. Maybe we're having some engagement problems on certain sites, especially the ones that are top performing. So we have dozens of different reports that we would run to sort of do a CO type assessment to look for opportunities, look for issues. So this is just one example of that. Another thing is a usability review. So this is a little bit more of a subjective type analysis, but essentially for this example, this is actually a software company. We're looking at their application, and we judge it based on a number of different usability factors. In this case, we're looking at navigation. Are there any problems in navigation? We're looking at visual clarity, or there's issues with things that should be important that aren't prominently displayed. Consistency throughout the site. Are there efficiency problems, or are users having issues with tasks? Or how long does it take them to perform a task? And general value, are we delivering the things that are most important to the users up front and making sure that they can access them? And then we would basically rate them on score and then use that again to inform tests that we decide to run. Another important tool is heat mapping. So on the left there is a click map. So this allows us to see where users are clicking within a site, within the navigation. Again, it gives us sort of a sense of what's important and what's not. And we can, obviously, that will inform the layout or design that we decide to run with. And then on the right is a scroll map. So that tells us how deep on a page users are scrolling. We've done some testing across different clients where we see a lot of scrolling on a mobile site, but much less so on a desktop. So that may inform us on the design of a mobile site differently than a desktop site, where scrolling is better possibly on mobile than desktop. So another important tool for that purpose. And also making sure that the content that we have that's valuable is within viewable distance. So if we see that less than 10% are scrolling past a certain point, then obviously they're missing that important content.
And Dave mentioned this, and this is such an important one with the heat mapping and scroll tracking and mouse tracking, is that you can do it by device. So we can do a separate session recording for mobile phones and tablet versus desktop, and then compare those. When we're running tests, we can also do it on the original versus the variation and compare those too. Because sometimes when you're changing design, it changes how people mouse, it changes how people click, and how far down they scroll. So
yeah. And then surveys. So these are using a tool that we have, basically being able to display, it's a Hotjar is the tool, display surveys based on particular pages that a user is on. We can display them after they're on a page for a certain time period. The idea is to gain some qualitative feedback or data. So this particular one is asking whether or not the user is getting the information that they would expect on a category level page, understanding are the details that we're providing enough for them to make a decision to click into an actual product. So another good tool there. And then another great way is to actually look at live chat data. So looking through a live chat log, what are customers talking about, what's important, where are they having issues, and then actually having interviews with customer service representatives to hear what customers are talking about, and again, identify new opportunities to improve. So once we have all that data and research, we're going to have some internal brainstorming sessions. And we're going to say, how can we use this data to create basically some tests throughout the year? On the right there is a platform that we use. It's called Experiment Engine. And that allows us to document all of our planning. Of course, you can do it in an Excel doc, whatever makes sense. On the little green circles there are sort of priority markers that we have. So we'll prioritize a test based on a couple of different factors. One, what's the level of effort? So do we need to get designers and developers involved? How much time will it take them to run this test?